Hello, everybody, and thanks again for joining today's webinar. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you happen to be joining us from. My name is Yad Jora, and I look after marketing for LANSA in Europe. And along with my colleagues today on our panel, John Rymer and Tony Graham, we're going to talk about integration options for low-code platforms. So before we begin, let's just get John and Tony to introduce themselves. John, would you like to go first?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Great to be here with you today to talk about this topic. I am an analyst at Forrester Research, Vice President, Principal Analyst, and I've been researching and analyzing the low-code development platform market for now about 6 or 7 years, and hopefully I can help today. Thanks for inviting me, Yad.
Thank you very much, John. Hello, Tony. Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, thanks, Yad. My name is Tony Graham. So I'm new to LANSA. I'm the product marketing manager, and I'm new because I recently jumped the fence as a customer, and now I've come over to LANSA, and so I'm kind of here with my customer hat on. I was a information systems manager for Spangler Candy, and as an IS manager, I spearheaded a lot of what you call the digital transformation programs. And so my experience was a .NET programmer, an RPG programmer, took over the IS manager at Spangler. And so, I have a lot of projects that went through integration. And so with their permission, I'm here to kind of give their story of their integrations through low code. So excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about it. So thank you very much, Ed.
Thanks very much, Tony. So today we're going to deliver the webinar as a bit of a roundtable discussion and hopefully make it as interactive as we can. John and Tony are both going to talk. I'm going to ask some questions, but we'd very much like to have your participation as well. So as we go through the webinar today, if you have any questions, please tap the Q&A button in the Zoom webinar control panel and tap your questions in. We'll see them at this end, and we'll pick them up and include them in the webinar as we go along or at the end. So without further ado, let me ask the first question of John. John, I wonder if you could set the scene for us. In this context, what does integration mean? And what are the challenges for low-code platforms when it comes to integration?
Thanks, Yad. Yeah, like I say, I've been researching and advising on low-code development for a number of years now, and I find that integration is often either overlooked or underappreciated. The importance of it is underappreciated. So let's talk about why. Next slide. So here, what I'm showing here are findings from our worldwide developer survey here at Forrester. We survey 3,300 or so developers in various places around the world. And we do ask them, the last couple of years, we've asked them about their use of low-code platforms to do software development and delivery. One of the questions we asked them was about their use cases. If you're using low-code, what sort of use cases are you delivering with it? So you can see here, complete customer-facing apps. These are the top 5. Business process automation and workflow applications, web front ends, administrative apps, gather data, track data, report on data. These cases, I think, all have one thing in common. Next slide. And that is they all rely very, very heavily on integration. In fact, I've started to think of low-code platforms as essentially big brokers that developers use to gather information together from disparate sources to make sense of it or manage it or analyze it, to weave together automated processes that span multiple systems, and of course deliver the experience of the application through mobiles. Mobile's a really big deal, I think, as we all know, but increasingly through smart speakers or through vehicles, sometimes, or through front ends like Slack and even Facebook and so forth. I think all of the my experience is that all of the low code cases I've seen rely very heavily on integration. There's a lot of emphasis on the back end, on integrating with back end, because there's so much useful data about the business, about finance, about inventory, about operations and supply chain and so forth. But also there are a lot of backends that now run on cloud platforms. Think of all the folks who use Salesforce for their customer data. And then you've got increasingly people gathering information from industrial equipment or vehicles or so forth, and feeding these into applications, into the applications that they're running on the low-code platform. Next slide. But it's not just the back end; it's also the front end. It's really remarkable how quickly information, data from devices, from vehicles, from equipment has become part of the landscape. This is happening very, very quickly. And so it's not only gather information from those sources, but also push user experience into those situations. Sometimes there's a UI, sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's more giving a signal or a notification. And then you've also, as I said, you've got social networks and of course e-commerce. There's a whole lot of experience that's delivered through commerce systems of various descriptions. So when you flip the slide, again, I've begun to think of low-code platforms and the applications that are built on them. Next slide. As like I say, brokers. They sit in the middle. They're the middleman, if you will, pulling together lots of information and brokering interactions with lots of applications. To deliver business functionality and business value. Next slide. So, how do low-code platforms actually help us? We've got, as developers delivering applications, we've got very expansive needs to be able to integrate both on the front end and the back end, integrate with systems in our data centers, as well as cloud sources, as well as maybe even systems that are running at a customer or partner. So the platforms themselves, generally provide integration functionality, but it's important to recognize the facilities that the platforms actually provide. The way that I think about it is working from very general protocol connectors as the sort of the baseline for integration functionality provided by a platform. A protocol connector gives you a connector that you can configure to speak to essentially an API, a REST API, a SOAP API, maybe speak SQL to a database. It's very, very generic, and you're basically building the logic and the information mapping that's required to actually interact with that system using that generic connector. I put robotic process automation in at this level as well. RPA has become a very hot topic, I think, because integration is so important a problem. RPA essentially uses screen scraping, so it doesn't use APIs. It's good for situations where there is no API, and the only way for you the best way or the easiest way for you to talk to that back-end system is through screen scraping and automating a sequence of clicks to get the information you need from that back-end system. Moving up a level, we get a little more specific. We've got connectors that actually understand specific products, like the Oracle database, very, very widely used, and it has a specific API, a specific SQL variant, if you will, and some vendors will provide a specific adapter that makes it easy for you to communicate with that system, like host systems, mainframes, AS400 and I series, even older systems. Machine learning, that's what ML means. Machine learning, specific connectors that allow you to talk to, say, one of the cloud providers' machine learning services. And then content is another big one, content being a very specific format of data. There are generic adapters as well as some specific adapters that allow you to speak to a content system. And then at the top of the list here, we have application adapters. These adapters get even more specific. They're connectors that are even more specific to particular applications. Let's take SAP, very, very widely used to manage back office. SAP has a very specific architecture, has particular APIs that SAP provides, has multiple of those APIs. These adapters understand those APIs. They expose those APIs to you. And then the last thing to understand is that there's a lot of partnering that goes on here. There are specific companies that specialize in integration, and there's a lot of the low-code vendors partner very well with those companies to help to expand the functionality they give to their customers. So the bottom line here, it's really important. Integration is really important. There are a variety of facilities out there from the vendors that help you with integration. It's important to understand the depth of those features. And lastly, there is some partner content that's available to you. Yeah, back over to you.
Yeah, so John, doesn't that mean that most low-code platforms are focused on cloud-based deployments and building apps for the web? Doesn't that mean that they're mostly focused on integrating with web-based applications too?
Yes. So the integration features that you'll find are web-based protocol connectors and web-based some product connectors. You think of the major SaaS properties out on the web. Just about every low-code vendor has a Salesforce adapter or an Office 365 adapter or something like that they'll provide. Part of this is because those are modern APIs. They're actually much more straightforward to integrate with than older APIs, than older integration mechanisms. And part of it is that's where the growth is for a lot of these vendors. They are really focused on cloud first and foremost, rather than deployment in the data center and integration with systems that run in the data center. They may have some capability, but their growth is really coming from the cloud.
But some of the systems that you're going to need to integrate with may have been around for years. Isn't that a problem?
Absolutely. This is why I think RPA has become so hot, is because as we progress through, popping up a level, we could talk about the digital transformations we're all living within. As that work progresses, you tend to tackle the easy cases first, right? The so-called low-hanging fruit. But eventually, you've got to address all of your estate, and that means, as you say, just some mainframe systems have literally been around for 40 years. The I series, AS400 is a huge presence, and some of those systems have been around 30, 40 years. And so integrating with them, in fact, is very, very important, and is it's not low-hanging fruit, put it that way.
That's great. Thanks, John. That's really helpful. So Tony, let's bring you in at this point. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about Spangler and about the environment at Spangler that you were building systems in.
Sure. First I'll start off with some background information, about Spangler, about their manufacturing, give everybody a good idea of who Spangler is. And if you look here, the most iconic brand for them is obviously the Dum Dum Sucker. I don't know if the lollipop, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a huge, giveaway. If you go to a bank or had kids and gone to a bank, you've most likely gotten a Dum Dum lollipop. They're also one of the last manufactured candy canes in the United States. They have the safety pop, which has a little string so that the kids can't, you choke. And then my personal favorite is the circus peanuts. And so if you look at what they're doing, they're making over 2 billion Dum Dums each year. They're making over 500,000 over 500,000 candy canes a day. They have 600 plus employees. They're global. I mean, they sell all over the world. And so, that gives you a good idea of how much product they're putting out, how many employees they have. And so now that we have that picture, we can kind of flip over to the IS side of the house. And so at the heart of Spangler Candy, at the heart of their ERP is an IBM I. Now, they've had this IBM I for a long time, for 30 years. And they've created their own custom ERP on it, and their ERP includes sales, accounting, invoices, customer service, shipping, inventory, lot tracking, quality, and all these various production aspects to manufacturing. And so somewhere early in the 2000s, they tried to move their ERP from like an RPG over to .NET. And what they found out is that the PCs at the time just weren't able to process the same as an IBM I. And so, people were having to wait 3-4 minutes for intense queries that had processing where, they'd wait milliseconds on an IBM I. And so what they had to start doing was keep writing RPG programs and they use this like .NET interface, basically prettied up what would be a green screen with .NET, but still access to RPG programs in the back. And so, when I took over as the IS manager, we were like a third on green screens, and 2/3 on I, but most everything was going back to calling an RPG program. So in the other systems we had 2 SQL systems on site. One was for our computer maintenance management system. So all of our maintenance documents, work orders, that was on site. And as well as a time clock HR package was on site SQL server. And so, that and the I had to talk a lot. We actually had to pay the software company for the time clock to make some connectors. Then that happened before I got there. And then recently, like right before I left, we transitioned a document control software to the cloud. And so we had the cloud, we had SQL, and we had IBM I. And some of the different devices we worked with, we had MC99 or 990 scan guns for inventory transaction and for QA checks. And what was cool is we're actually transitioning those away. One of the projects I got to do was Visual LANSA sort of let us transition away from 9090s and go into a Android-based scan gun, which offered quite a bit more functionality. And then we had scanners, and we had some production machines that would send ASCII strings to a .NET program when we throw that on the iSeries. And we did all this with about 3 programmers. 2 of them are RPG experts and .NET experts, and then I had an EDI expert. So, I mean, if you think about it, they did all this with a relatively small group of programmers. And so that's basically the background of Spangler Candy, of what they manufacture and of what their data systems were.
So Tony, what were the specific integration challenges you had at Spangler and the new applications that you had to build?
So it all started, basically, they came to me and said, management came to me and said, we need a employee application, right? And so they said, we want the employees to be able to access their own information remotely. And so my requirements were I have to build a new application. It's going to have to integrate with the current IS systems. And then I'm going to have to show the employees that they're going to have to, the employees are going to want to see the following information. They're going to want to see their pay stubs. Now, so the pay stubs generally come from the I. However, so pay stubs is the I. The hours worked at different pay rates. Now that comes from an SQL database. And so that, at Spangler, you may work 3 hours on line A and you're going to get paid at one rate. And then you work the rest of the day on line B and that's a different rate. And so each day you might be working at different rates. So that's all kept on an SQL server, but we have to feed that back to the I so we can line it up with what is their current pay rate and what's those rates at on those other lines. So they kind of have to go back, cross-check. And also on the I, we had had various, RPG programs that would run taxes, you'd go pick up their insurance. So then we need vacation time, how much is remaining, how much used. There again, some of that information was on the SQL, but it had to go back to the I to see what were they allowed, had their time rolled over yet. So then they wanted to see excused and unexcused hours. And then they wanted to be able to say, well, we probably want to interface with our document control in case we ever want to put out an all hands bulletin, in case somebody needs to see, a safety report they're involved in, maybe disciplinary, something, some sort of document that we keep on the document control software that they might want to see in this application. And so I'm looking at, okay, well, I have to integrate with the I have to be able to call RPG programs. I have to go back to an SQL server on site, a very old SQL server. And then I also have to be able to talk to the cloud. So that was what was presented to me. They're like, okay, this is what we need. All right, go do it.
Oh,
so
Tony, it's John.
Yeah.
This is classic. What you're describing are to the employee, they're really simple things. I just want to see my pay stub. I want to see the hours I worked at different pay rates. They're really simple things. But in order to deliver them, the integration in the back end is actually pretty hard.
Right. Yeah. When I started looking at it, you're like, it's just crazy because you have a third of the information stored in one SQL server and maybe another third, in the I, but then this other third is like the programs that sort of connect the two. So you're like, oh, I just want to see my pay stub. And believe it or not, before this app, they weren't able to see in detail their hours worked because 20 years ago, 10 years ago, when this first started up, they didn't need to see that kind of information. Nobody really wanted to see the detail. And so we just sort of generically transferred it over in their pay stubs. And if they had a question about it, had to, go to HR and find out, take up HR's time to dig into it, to bring up the old records on the SQL. And so it was very time consuming. It sounds easy, but it was actually a very time consuming process before this.
Right.
So Tony, tell us about the app that you actually built and some of the other choices that you had to make.
Right. So this is where everything kind of blew up, right? Because they're like, okay, we want to build this app. So then I'm like, okay, do I just create one app? So none of my programmers, I have 3 amazing RPG programmers, 2 of them that are amazing .NET programmers. But now I have to build a mobile app. Nobody has experience creating mobile apps. Nobody has web experience. Nobody, I think one of the programmers came from a spot where she maintained some HTML code, but nobody could develop an app, mobile app, web app, start to finish. So now I'm deciding, okay, do I take the time to develop the whole team? Because I can't just train one person. If something happens to that one person, then you're out. And this is such a big application. So, and I started to say, well, maybe it's time to move the whole ERP to a browser-based solution. So if you step forward one, so here's the thing, we started talking because management has already been wanting mobile capabilities. People out on the floor have been wanting mobile capabilities. The management wants to see custom dashboards so they can, sales wants to see the sales and production wants to see the efficiencies. So now it's starting to make sense. Like, okay, well, now maybe it's time to move all this. And so if you step forward, we started looking at maybe some packaged ERPs. The problem with packaged ERPs is it didn't solve my employee application issue. So even if I moved everything else to packaged ERP, I'm still going to have to create this custom application. The other thing we got looking at was, okay, so packaged ERPs, they cost a lot. And then every time you want to customize something, that's even more money. So it came down to like, okay, we need a solution that can create my app, but using that same technology, we can start redoing our ERP. And so, I did all this research. I found out about low code, and that's when I found Visual LANSA, is that, hey, if Visual LANSA, I can call RPG programs, I can direct access old database, old SQL databases, I can direct access, the files on the IBM I, and I can still access my cloud app with REST API. So it kind of just involved, it just did everything I needed. And my programmers didn't have to learn web-based, languages. So it just made sense. And so I said, okay, let's bring in Visual LANSA. And then, so if you go to the next slide.
I just want to highlight that's classic, Tony. That we see that with so many clients where they need to progress their automation, and mobile's a big deal, right? I mean, there's so much demand, and yet, to your point, you don't have time and you don't have the budget to just completely replace your staff. So how do you actually satisfy that demand? This is where low code has become a very powerful alternative for so many clients.
Yeah, the speed that somebody can learn low code is really amazing, and especially something like let's say with Visual LANSA, you have a lot of flexibility. So I bring in Visual LANSA. I'm like, okay, here we go. So then one of the employees says, oh, wait a second, I'm going to have to log into a green screen. I'm going to have to log into the .NET, and I'm going to have to log into this new system until we get everything converted. And I was like, oh yeah, that's not real convenient. I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to make anybody else do that. And 2's a pain enough. So now they have to go to 3. And so I kind of went back to Lance and I said, here's my problem. I don't know if this is going to work. When you go back and talk about like RPA and stuff like that, they have this product called Axes and Ramp, and they were able to take our green screen, scrape them, fancy them up, and throw them right into our Visual LANSA, no problem. And so what that did was, okay, now I eliminated green screens, right? I didn't eliminate them, but they look brand new. So the people using it, they think, oh, this is such a cool new app, and it's just a green screen fancied up, with the green screen taken away. And so that was really quick, like, cool, okay, now we got rid of the green screens, and now we can work on getting rid of the .NET. .NET, they'll just log into one system. And so, sort of recap, if you go to the next slide, so our integration, like we had the I series, we had old SQL databases that had no REST APIs, no nothing like that. They were just old on our on-site on hold Windows server, and we were able to integrate. We were able to take the I, we were able to take SQL, and we were able to take cloud. We were able to merge that into one application that was able to replace our our ERP, because we can take the green screens and we're redoing the .NET and throwing that on mobile. And then now their application will be on the framework as well, so they can go in and access all their stuff. So we're able to marry all of these into one platform, into one spot they can log into and see everything.
So Tony, having gone through all that, it sounds like quite a big integration challenge. What did you learn from it looking back, and what might you have done differently if you had to do it again?
The hardest, I think, one of the biggest things we learned is there's just not a lot of products out there that do everything you need to easy. I mean, we looked through several different platforms, and they could do this real well, but not this. Mm-hmm. So, one of the things we learned is I was eager to get going, is you really got to sit down and lay out everything you need, everything you're going to integrate with, and ask those questions ahead of time. Hey, can you integrate with this? Can you integrate with that? And the other part of that is making sure you're getting something that your programmers, your developers, these have been developers for 30 years, that they are comfortable using. Right. Because the best software in the world, or they may say, is if your programmers, developers don't accept it, or like, this is, wait, what is this? And so it was bringing them on board, finding the right solution to our problem. And so that was our biggest thing is biggest thing we learned is, and then as we were going through this, we found out that, like, you go to sit down with an end user, and they're like, oh man, this has been so horrible. I wish we could have changed this a while ago, and you're like, okay, well, now's the time to change it. And so, as you go through these big projects, then you start learning it's very important to find out from the end user, their thought, because as we started just doing one for one, like, oh, this was the information they had on this screen, that's what we'll put on this screen. It was like, they're like, no, this, oh, I need this, I need this, I need this. And so before you go writing a bunch of screens, you know, or update programs, it is very important to go back to your customer, your end user, whichever one, you know, you're programming for, and go, okay, how can we make this better? And I think that was one of the biggest things we learned is, don't just assume that because this program, this app ran this way, that's how it should be, should be rewrote.
I just want to highlight a couple of points that resonate, Tony, that with my research. One is that you didn't have integration specialists at hand. You know, you'll find integration specialists, essentially developers who specialize in integration. You'll find those in some of the, you know, the mega corporations, but they're really scarce. And the other thing is that, as you know, I think as your experience shows, the general trend is to rely on application developers to do integration. So there's really a convergence now of application development skills and integration skills. And you know, to your point, you've got to put a tool set or an approach in front of your developers that's actually practicable for them. It's something they can actually use, because they're not only doing integration, they're doing integration in the service of creating mobile apps or, you know, better user experiences.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And not only are they tasked to be integrators, they're tasked to do it in an extreme quick amount of time. So it you know, the tool also can't be something that they have to fumble around with. It's got to be pretty intuitive, something that they can pick up, improve their efficiency, not something that hinders their efficiency. Because they're not integrators, they're developers. They want to sit and develop programs.
Right.
And so, yeah, integration can be tough if it's not really spelled out for them.
John, that's a really good point. So what else should enterprises be looking for when it comes to integration options, especially from their low-code platforms?
Well, going back to the basic layout I had earlier, with the you know, in describing what I've seen on the products. If you go to the next slide, you've got to be really, you know, there are these various levels of integration features that I mentioned, and I referred to them as being generic at the base and getting more and more specific as you went up the stack. There's essentially a battle here between you know, sort of you know, programmer power and productivity. If you can find an application adapter for the, you know, for the whatever application it is you need to integrate with, that's going to make integrating with that application much simpler. The developer isn't going to have to learn as much about how that backend application is structured, and the APIs, learn the APIs that are available in order to integrate with it. It's you know, the application's data and functionality is presented at a much higher level, and it's much easier to understand. Product connectors are kind of in the middle. You've got, you know, you're working at a technical level, you know, integrating with say, like I mentioned, an Oracle database or a content management system or something like that. It's more productive because you're dealing with a higher level of abstraction for that product, you know, than you are if you're basically dealing with it at a protocol level, like through a REST API or something. So you know, down at the bottom, sort of least easy to develop for are the protocol adapters and RPA. RPA, you're clicking around. You're basically recording scripts. You know, the issue there is that the scripts are difficult to maintain as things change. So you got to look at when you look at the products, you got to look at who are your people, as Tony's describing. Who are your people? What are they capable of doing? What, you know, you generally want integration to be as easy as possible, because it's just one of the aspects of the applications that they're building. It's not their whole world. And so this is why a lot of companies will look beyond the low-code provider to a partner because they're looking for more power and ease of use than they're able to get from the vendor itself.
That's great, John. Thank you for that. That's really, really helpful. Tony, can I come back to you? If you can put your LANSA hat on again for a second, could you tell us a bit about what LANSA are doing to address some of these particular integration challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to start off, obviously, when you're when you're creating a new application, do you not need to integrate with something? Apps are created because there's a need, right? There's not a solution to access data, to manipulate data, to combine data. There's just not a solution out there, so you have to create it. And so, you start off with that, and that's where integration is so important. So, when you look at other low-code platforms, they have limitations. They're cloud-based. And because of that, they want you to REST APIs because they want to integrate with other cloud-based, applications as well. And so when you get into some more technical or more difficult integration needs, a lot of times you'll have to drop out of their platform. You'll have to create a workaround, a special, an API or a special program that the low code can then consume. So, the problem with that is, and it sort of takes away from the low code because you're no longer just staying in low code programming away, right? You're stopping, you're dropping out, you're going and creating, another solution in another language. And so what that does is now you're maintaining, your low code, and now you have this other piece, this other wrapper to maintain. And so if low code, updates or your whatever, you have a hard time talking. So now what your wrapper was made for, what your custom solution was made for, doesn't work anymore. And then you have to go back and tweak that. Also troubleshooting, you now have an extra step in troubleshooting because you're not staying in the platform anymore. And so when you look at what LANSA does, how we integrate with the different apps is, we're like, okay, we're going to integrate with everything. So REST APIs, yep, sure, we are going to do REST APIs. We're going to be able to go direct access to that database. So, we were able to write SQL statements right inside, make the connection right inside our IDE. No special connectors. We just establish the connection, you go read. And so, natively, we're going to do web services. We're going to, DLLs, .NET components if you need to. If we keep going, when you look at say like FTP, LANSA does it natively. Now there's some low code that say, hey, go get a plugin from our store. And that's the solution. And the problem with that there again is sometimes that plugin is not created by the software, it's a third party. So are they keeping up with it? Is security, are they keeping up with security measures? What happens if the low code, again, upgrades in versions and this is no longer compatible? And if that's a key component to your application, all of a sudden you're scrambling around, hoping that this third party upgrades it or somebody else new comes along. And so, we just do it inside our IDE. We just think it's better. You can, we give you the tools to do it without going to a store, without going to these different plugins. And then, message queues, on your IBM I, if you need to go out and grab those, if you need to do email, all natively, and same thing with flat files, EDI, zip. And so, in LANSA, so we take this approach that says, hey, stay right here, and we are going to integrate with everything. So that's kind of our approach, and So.
Thanks, Tony. That's great. John, I'm going to come back to you in a moment and ask you to wrap up by talking about how you see the future and future integration needs. But just before I do, at the end of the session, we'll have time for some questions. And we've already had some questions come in during the session, but I just wanted to remind you all and give you the chance to tap in some questions for the Q&A session at the end. So if you'd like to ask anything of John or Tony and anything that they've discussed in the webinar so far, please do tap the Q&A button in your Zoom webinar control panel, type in your question, and we'll get to them at the end. So John, can I come back to you then and ask you what we're likely to see in the future around integration and low-code platforms and how integration needs may change?
Indeed. Let's get into it. What do we like to see in the future? More. I think you know, we've written some research at Forrester about how the worlds of app dev and integration are converging. And the reason for that is there are so many resources now that are available to create applications and inform applications in exactly the way that Tony's been describing it. By the way, Tony's describing described was the work he did at Spangler for employees. The same, there's a corollary for customers, you know, and again, simple operations like show me my account, show me my account status actually require quite a lot of integration on the back end. So the direction I think is more integration, more integration links, more integrations being built into application projects. And I think also the result of that is going to be greater volumes of information flowing through integration links. And we're going to, and Tony mentioned this, we're going to have to be able to rely and manage those integration links within the application experience, not as some external, program or some external, appendage to the application that we just hope and pray that it stays healthy. So I've listed the 4 topics here that we're researching. Low-code platforms have, like I mentioned, they have integration capabilities. You just saw Tony just elaborated on the facilities within LANSA. How well will those facilities perform under very heavy loads? In the past, we've relied on specific integration servers for high load conditions. Where are the boundaries here? When is it actually advisable to rely on an external integration product versus run your integration through your application platform? As we see more and more integration, we'll see more and more sophistication in the integration patterns. One of the big areas is transactionality. If you are pulling information and sequencing sort of an operation that actually goes against 2, 3, maybe 4 different data sources, and you need to coordinate the create, delete, etc. operations against those 4 sources. Well, that's pretty sophisticated transaction logic. You want to do it all together, not one at a time. Will the product actually support those kinds of sophisticated integration patterns? Does the low-code platform promote shared integration services? This is a really important point that, again, the history of integration tells us that if we're not careful and planful about the way we approach integration, we will in fact end up with a spider's web, a hornet's nest of point-to-point integrations that are really difficult to manage and really difficult to maintain over time. It's much, much better to have a planful approach so that when we need to integrate with the I series, for example, we have an adapter that everybody uses, and we maintain that adapter as a product, and we keep it in sync with updates to the platform, and updates makes application maintenance far more doable. So does a platform actually help us here by providing sort of a catalog function or a set of way to sort of direct developers to the standard integrations we've built for them? And then lastly, how does the low-code platform help us understand what's going on in the integration patterns that we're building? This is really about reliability, but also security and manageability. if we're going to take dependencies on integration links within our applications, we really need tools to give us visibility into what's going on. Are there threats? Are there potential breakdowns that could affect the availability of that application, the performance of it, and obviously the security of information? So more and more pressure on the platform providers to give us functionality we need to function within this world.
I really like that, John. More of everything. I think that's absolutely right. Okay, so we're just about out of time, but we do have time for a few questions, and there are a couple of questions that have come in. So this one, firstly, for you, Tony, and the question was, how did your programmers go about learning LANSA? How long did that take? We've had a couple of questions on that, so I've kind of pulled them together. But what was involved in getting up to speed with the low-code platform for your team?
So, LANSA was really helpful in creating or helping us learn LANSA. So, luckily, the RDMLX language that you can code inside LANSA, it's if you're I think if you're experienced with any other programming language, you're going to pick that up quick. So that part was pretty easy. And then there's some services LANSA offers that can bring your programmers up to speed really quick. And it didn't take us long. There's some mentoring sessions, and so it was really cool. Our programmers really took those mentoring sessions, took some examples that provided, with the download, and then they were able to start creating their apps. It is a little bit of a learning process. We just didn't sit down and create our first apps in a day. We had a little bit of learning curve. We did some bad stuff, but it was very quick. Within, I want to say within a couple of months, we started seeing true results. Actual programs people could use and integrate with. They were integrating with all these different systems, and it was really cool. And so the biggest thing is, take some time to get mentored just for a little bit, and they can really break it down into relatable in other languages you've learned. And so it didn't take my programmers long at all to come up to speed and then start running with it.
Thanks, Tony. That's great. One more for you, which was, did you keep the iSeries as a backend when you built applications in LANSA for web and mobile? And what challenges did you face keeping the iSeries programs and databases alive?
So here's what was awesome. The big selling point, why LANSA was great for us. So it installs right on the IBM I. And so, you can get it for Windows, but ours installed right on the I. So we didn't change anything on the I. We kept the I running. And since it runs on the I, and the I is such a, fast machine, these web apps were really quick. They were very responsive. And so there's nothing we really had to do. You just keep chugging along, business as usual. You have different development environments. So we had our development environment we could sit there and play around in. And when it was ready to okay, we want to test this out, we move it up to the test environment, let people mess with it, tweak it, and then we can put it into production. And so we didn't have to do anything with the I. For all of our other systems, it was business as usual. And then as we got new apps, we just promoted them up to the live, and then they could start accessing those. And so it was very seamless. It was very easy. You get LANSA for the I, install it right on the I, and you just go about your business. Nothing has to change.
Thanks,
until you
Tony.
want it to.
Yeah, that's great. John, there's a question here that I think I might direct at you. I think you touched on this a little bit in your summary when you were talking about futures, but the question is, low-code promises to simplify application development. We've talked about integration getting more complex. Isn't there a paradox there? And isn't the onus on the low-code providers to address this?
Oh, absolutely. And some will. So yes, the onus is on the low-code providers to continue to raise the bar and to address, say, transactionality in integration links that are running on their platforms. I think Tony mentioned this. The whole purpose of these platforms is to make complex activity, meaning software development, much easier to do than it is if you're coding. And if you need, say, transactionality in your links, and that forces you to drop out of the low code environment and drop into some other coding environment or another environment, that's suboptimal. You really want to do as much as possible within that platform. Now, some of the vendors are there. There's about 100 vendors, Yad. So there's a lot of product out there. Really good product, by the way. But not all the vendors are as focused on integration as others. Some are much more focused on, the application development tooling, and they really, the ones that really rely on partners for integration. That's a signal that they view integration as being outside of their core business, and they're gonna rely on a partner for that. There are others, and obviously LANSA's put a lot of investment into integration, where integration is actually core, and they are investing in in additional capabilities, as well as tooling that allows people to do more and more sophisticated things.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful. We've had so many questions here that we can't possibly get to them all. So I'd like to apologize to you if we don't get to your question today. But what we will do is we do have a record of every question that's been asked. So we will get back to each of you and address your specific question by email if we don't get to it during this session. So one final question, John, that I will put to you before we finish. And the question that's been asked is your opinion on no-code alternatives to low-code.
Well, no code and low code are fraught. That's a fraught topic. No code, I think of as largely an aspiration. There are, our research tells us that there are some use cases for some products that actually can be delivered without a single line of code. Additional code. However, there are many use cases where there is some coding that the customer must do in order to achieve their goals. Some of the vendors that are really pushing hard to eliminate the need for coding classify themselves as no code. And they can do that. It's a free country, and they can do that. I would just be cautious about that promise, because if you adopt a product and you expect you will never have to code, and then lo and behold you end up having to do some coding, that's not a good place to be. So for me, I describe it as an aspiration, and when it happens, it's a beautiful thing, and it can happen. There's some really good work that's going on, but be careful. Be careful about setting expectations with your people, particularly your executives.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, John. Look, I think we are pretty much out of time, so I'm just going to stop it there, and it just remains for me to thank both of you, John and Tony, very much for all your insights today. I think it's been really valuable. And most of all, thank you to everybody who's joined the session today. We hope you found it useful too. If there are any questions that we didn't get to, like I said, we will follow those up with each of you individually. But it just remains for me to thank you all for joining, and we will talk to you again very soon. Thanks again for coming today.